So welcome everyone. I'd like to go around and I will call on you and you can introduce yourselves and you can tell us your name, obviously, your role on the team, and also maybe just a little fun fact about yourself before we jump in. Dom, can we kick it off with you?
You put me on the spot right there and then, Hunter. Hi, everyone. My name's Dom Hyams, Head of Strategy at Purple Goat. Um, that basically means that everything that comes into Purple Goat is an opportunity. I essentially oversee that until it becomes a live campaign. So all that creative and all that kind of client liaison that we're doing. In terms of a fun fact, when I was 11 years old, I shuffled a mile on my bum. How about that for a random fact? There you go.
Well done.
Thank you, Dom. And Harriet, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah,
Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Hunter. I'm Harriet, so I'm a campaign manager at Purple Goat. So I've been there since we began pretty much in 2020. And as Dom said, he's the head of strategy. So basically from anything that's signed, myself and the team on the campaign side run it, whether it be influencer activation, insights, consultancy, whatever it may be. We basically deliver the campaign and get it done and get it live. So yeah, that's what I mean. Fun fact wise, I really struggle with this question. Don't have a fun fact, to be honest. I really do struggle. So let's just pass it over.
Sure,
Like
absolutely. Well, I can already tell you're a fun person. And how about we pass over to Dani?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dani, also campaign manager here at Purple Goat. So again, handle everything from influencers to delivering the campaigns that Dom comes up with. And yeah, fun fact, I guess it is that I used to play professional disability football. That's the one I'll go with.
Awesome, thank you. And Carmen.
Hi, I'm Carmen. I'm the social media and PR exec at Purple Goat. So part of what I do is showcasing what we do and who we are on our social media pages, and not only to the disabled community, but also to brands and to people outside of the disabled community. Many times we see that disability narratives are usually associated with PT and sadness, and we try to stay away from that and create very fun, light-hearted, original content to educate, but also to entertain and just show the community to everyone. And a fun fact, I don't think it's a fun fact, but I'm from Spain, and I decided to move to the UK, the grey and rainy UK. If you consider that a fun fact, there you go.
You know, that's what everyone says. I come to the UK for the weather, it's
yeah,
it's true.
I'm curious, before we jump in for what you do, I'd love to just hear, where did the name Purple Goat come from? Anyone want a popcorn style answer that for us?
Sure. So our sister agency is called Goat, which is essentially the largest influencer focused agency in the world. And that stands for the kind of greatest of all time pop culture reference. And then purple, more and more so, it's global, but particularly in the UK and Europe, purple is the color of disability. So that's the color associated with disability. And you have your Purple Tuesday and different events now popping up that are very much linked disability with the color purple. So yeah, Purple Goat, hence what we're called that.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Dom. So I'd be curious to hear about, what does authentic disability representation in the media look like for each of you? And what does it not look like? So we can go around and talk about maybe some things that you've noticed. You don't have to call anybody out. It's not, we're not going to throw shade, but if you want, I'm not going to reject it, but, I'm not going to ask you to do that. But, what are the things that are successful, are maybe misleading, are misinformed? What is that balance, and how, maybe some things that you feel really excited or proud about that you've done at Purple Goat? Harriet, can I start with you?
I think authentic representation, there's many layers to it, but I think doing it well is just ensuring that the narrative is actually realistic and real to the person that's communicating it. I think it's being consistent. So you can't just do a one-off activation and expect, oh, I'm authentic and I'm representing and inclusive. That's not how it works. Like, you need to be very consistent with it. And I think kind of the ways people and brands do it wrong is forcing a narrative that's not there, or really wanted to pull out like negatives of a disability. So like Carmen says, like a lot of people will talk around like the pity and like suffering, or like very negative connotations that are not true at all. So that's how you can do it wrong, because it creates a massive gap within like communities and how people view disability. And I think language is massive as well. So I think a lot of brands in the past, maybe not so much the ones that we work with, but people will assume having on a billboard a wheelchair user, that encompasses all disabilities and everybody in the community. But it's not, that's not true. There's so many different disabilities and pillars and individuals out there that you need to be inclusive of a whole community, and just inclusive on the whole, like just be diverse as a standpoint and consistent. To me, that's key. But yeah, I think Dani, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, sure. Just very quickly, completely agree with all of that, luckily. But also, I think we try and look through a lens, what we would call the social model of disability, with regard to, you know, everything we do and think about. So the medical model focuses in on the impairment, the disability itself in terms of its medical description, whereas actually what is disabling about life isn't that impairment, it's about the provision in society for how we deal with that. So actually I could have a very independent life regardless of what disability I have, and actually that's what is disabling me. It's those sort of institutional barriers that are in place, whether that's in an environmental, organizational. So those are what we should be framing our narratives around, kind of, you know, impairment more than actually what's physically wrong with an individual, and focusing in on that. I think that, you know, when you do that, it just frees it up to be much more natural and real in everything you do. Similarly, in terms of kind of the way that we want to kind of show best in class, you do that by having the people in the room at all times. So if you've got the disabled community in the room helping you make ads, then suddenly that becomes a lot easier to create great things. So at Purple Goat, we've got 50% plus lived experience of disability in the team. Myself and Dani on this call, you know, we're disabled. But, you know, without having that confidence and that disability know-how in the room, when you do things, you're not going to get the same quality of result. And it's as simple as that. So whether it's in the organization or in the agency you're working with, you need that lived experience. And then suddenly things that are mind-bogglingly difficult and you're trying to guess become very straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Don, we might be losing you a little bit on your connection.
To treat that and how to approach a certain particular narrative.
We lost you there just a little bit at the last tail, but it looks like you are back with us, Dom.
I'm back. I'm here. Sorry.
Last I heard you saying, you were talking about having the representation in the room. There's 50%, and it makes things much more straightforward in the room when you have that actual lived experience, was the last thing we heard you come through clearly here.
That's all fine. That's pretty much where I got to. So yeah, it just makes the whole process a lot easier when you've got that lived experience, and it's not an issue at all, because you just are able to think with confidence because you know you've got that know-how in the room.
Awesome. Thank you, Dom. Dani, would you like to touch on this?
Yeah, I think for me, authentic representation is not having the extremes of disability. Quite often you'll get like certain stereotypes that just get replayed constantly. And I think it's actually just showing like the everyday lives of disabled people, which is what we do at Purple Goat through influencer marketing. And I think that's why it's so effective and why it works so well, because we just get to show what it's like to live every day as a disabled person, and all the joys and obviously occasionally the down parts of that too. And I think that's really important. We have to especially in the media, there is so many stereotypes around disability, and we get to break those by just working with, everyday people that happen to have built a platform online.
Thank you. And Carmen.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that has already been said, but I think from my own perspective, I'm not disabled. So my view on authentic representation before I joined Purple Goat was very different, because society had told me certain things about disability. And, as we were saying before, we've only seen disability in very specific cases, usually associated to charity cases, or maybe you have completely opposite of a Paralympian. So I had to unlearn a lot of things, but I think similar to what Dom was saying, sometimes you have to, so authentic representation to me is that it's not just a group of privileged people in a room trying to write someone else's story. It's just bringing those minority groups and involving them in the process, because they're the ones that actually know their story and they know what they've been through and they know how to actually do things the right way. And many times we see that brands or films or advertisements sometimes have some kind of backlash on social media, or they get cancelled because they don't do representation in the right way. And many times it's because the minority groups that are being affected are not behind the scenes. So that wouldn't happen if the teams and the companies will consider that as well. So I think that's, for me, that's how authentic representation can be achieved.
Awesome. Thank you, Carmen. I'd love to hear a bit about being, for Purple Goat, being it's specialists in inclusive, in the dialogue, for being an inclusive agency. So what are implications of that? If a client comes to you, what are their expectations, and maybe what do you get to teach them, and like how maybe those expectations might change once they actually start the dialogue with you. Would anyone like to jump in on that? Dom, I believe you're muted.
Do you guys want me to take that one?
Oh, you can do.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question, and I think that you get different kind of case studies of why someone engages with Purple Goat. Sometimes it's because they absolutely want to do the right thing and want things to be as progressive and forward thinking and best in class as they can possibly do, and they know that is helped by working with an agency like us, working with the disabled community from the very start of an idea. And then unfortunately there'll also sometimes be people that want us to almost validate the work they are doing, maybe, and that's probably the other side of it. So they've done work, but they just want to put the tick box of, oh well, Purple Goat have had involvement in this, but actually, unless we've been in from the ground up, unless we've been right at the sort of start of that creative process, it's very difficult for us to then backtrack and not help them, or not make suggestions for how something can be better. So we want people to be open to us offering feedback, offering how things can be developed and progressed over time in terms of how we work. And then just broadly, we see that quite often there's a lot of fear around working in and around disability. People don't know where to start quite often. They know they want to do something and they know they want to do great work, but because they can't commit to doing everything right now, they go, well, maybe we shouldn't do anything at all then. And that for us is the worst answer. We know we're all on a journey of inclusivity and no one is perfect. And so we just want to encourage brands to start somewhere and iterate their practices over time. And that's something that we very much want to handhold them through that process of. So we want people to feel comfortable to be vulnerable, I suppose, but then also, allow us to take them on that journey from A to B to C to actually being more inclusive and representative as they go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dom. Anyone want to add to that before I move on to another question? No, nailed it. Best in class, to use Dom's phrase. I love that. I'm like, oh, I'm using that. I'm putting that one in my pocket, Dom.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to jump in here, can we talk about, what is the role of like legal and regulatory bodies in authentic media representation? And what about like advocacy organizations? Can we talk about, because, there's this perception in media that we're talking about, but then there's also these other facets. So would anyone like to touch on that?
Anyone else want to take that?
Dom, I think you're best for this one, but I will.
Okay.
The next one I will be.
And we can popcorn and jump in, and
Yeah, that's right. I think from a legal perspective, and I assume you mean, Hunter, with regard to like, should there be stipulations in place from a legal imperative of how inclusive things should be? And I think it's really interesting to think about, because it's like the carrot or the stick. Should we be making sure that things are inclusive because people are scared not to, or litigated against if they don't? And to some extent, I would say maybe that's a great idea, because then you would have this natural wave of inclusivity going on. But would there be resentment because of it? And would people actually be educating themselves and upskilling themselves as to the why they are having to be inclusive? Or are they just going to see it as, they're being demonized, for doing the wrong thing previously, and this is just another tick box woke exercise for them to jump through? So I think that ultimately we want to see intrinsic learning from the ground up. We want people to understand and educate themselves as to why disability is important as gender or race or any other protected characteristic, and that general like self-awareness and self-education that people can do in that process is really important. So I think there could be a balance, but ultimately, unless people genuinely understand why they are doing something, then it might actually create a barrier between the communities and create us and them kind of situation. And then there's the second bit of your question around advocacy. I think that what makes us different from an advocacy group is that we are there to be essentially to work with the client. So we're commercially minded. So we're never going to, only have the kind of disabled agenda in mind. We know that it's all about like doing what you can when you can. And as I said before, like being on that journey. We don't want to slap people on the wrist for sort of doing things not quite right. We want to show them where their kind of maybe weaknesses are, but then support them for being better. And so that safe space that we create, where actually they can say anything to us, they can ask the burning questions, that's really important. We're not there to just say to them, oh, you're terrible, you need to do better, because actually, again, that's kind of othering, and we want to be as inclusive as possible with everything we do.
I love that. Makes me, of course, I'm just going to relate everything back to my new dog, because that's my life now. So it's all about positive reinforcement, right? I'm not going to yell at him for making a mistake. It's like, well, we're teaching them something new. So we're going to try to highlight what's working and just encourage that behavior as well, but also point out, well, this is where there's room for improvement, right?
Exactly. And I think that's where you get real, genuine learning and development there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I'll add to this as well. I think aside from like kind of like the regulatory side, I think we do speak to a lot of brands now, big organizations or like smaller organizations, but you do tend to see now that people have like diversity and inclusion teams or such, or a head of that's like pushing some initiatives or bringing some new ideas into the mix. And I think there's also pros and cons with that, right? Because sometimes we come across people that are heading up those and they're really genuinely passionate. They have the experience, and they're actually people from within the community who are speaking on behalf of the organization and trying to bring their creative and marketing forward. However, sometimes you can feel as though like the diversity inclusion department are just there for a tick box. So there's like how Dom said, like some people get, you know, you want to give them feedback and it to be taken in the best way possible because we're trying to make everything better. But I think sometimes there's just a lot of learning still to be happening in like big organizations. Not every, but like, you know, when they're saying diversity and inclusion, sometimes they either miss disability completely or they're not quite sure around disability, and there's not actually someone on that team that's has a lived experience that can bring that forward into the marketing. So I think that's quite interesting as well. And I think that has definitely changed over time and will only continue to change because a lot more people are interested around inclusion and representation. Like you see it a lot more in the media and on social and, you know, everywhere now. And it's like a genuine interest rather than like kind of probably back in the day, we were like really fighting to make this change. It's more like people want to do it as part of their marketing and just general organization. So that's also another part that I've kind of noticed as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Harriet. Carmen or Dani, would you like to jump in before we move on to the next topic?
I think they said everything. I don't know if Dani wants to add anything else.
Great. Thank you. So we have some great questions coming in from the audience. So audience, if you have more, please do feel free. You can engage in this conversation. You are part of the dialogue. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you have comments as well, that's also great. Just remember that this is a safe space and please be mindful and respectful of how we are communicating in this shared space. But we would love to hear from you. So I'm going to pick some questions here from the audience. Feel free to chime in popcorn style, my panel. Can the media sector help optimize the future of the workplace for neurodiverse people? What a wonderfully big question.
So can you say that again? Sorry.
Absolutely. Can the media, so let's say media and media representation in the media sector, help optimize the future of the workplace for neurodiverse folks? So, you know, I think what we're talking about here is this representation, right? And this change in misconceptions from old stuff, right? We've seen, you know, things from the old days that are just downright offensive. And then there's just a lot of misinformation and then just like watered down stuff. So I would just expand this question out a little bit to all of you is, you know, do you feel like, yeah, okay, we're helping a brand. Are we helping the greater good as well? You know, and how does that, you know, one little story maybe help a wider audience when you're working with a client, let's say?
I think so. I think through everything that we do, because we're working with influencers and creators themselves from the community as a whole, that's their story that they're saying and the narrative, and they're educating on, you know, not everybody's going to be the same, and not everybody has different needs, abilities, whatever it may be, like that. It's a very individual basis. So I think on a whole, by using media and through social media and different campaigns, you're educating, you know, wider audiences and organizations on people and kind of just getting rid of stereotypes, because I think there's a stereotype for neurodiversity and a stereotype for disability. Like there's very much been stereotypes in the past. So I think people actually talking and utilizing their own story on social media, it's like it's just sharing their narrative and just educating everybody, because it's not always going to be the same. And I think that's good. Like everybody's different. But yeah, that's kind of my point on it. But I don't know if Carmen or Dani want to add.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I think what we're able to do is actually, like when we're working in the media and stuff like that, because we're using real people with these real conditions and stuff like that, they just bring that real lived experience. So we're not putting out misinformation. We have factual experience, we have the factual knowledge, and but also we always highlight that actually everyone's experience is individualistic. So what is the case for one person might not be the case for another person. But yeah, we are actually using that real lived experiences in our campaigns, which just stops the spread of those like old stereotypes and misconceptions that have been like overused so much in the media previously.
Yeah, thank you, Dani. Carmen, anything you'd like to add?
Not really. Everything that I was going to say, it's already said. So
So the beauty of having a large, very smart panel. It's
yeah.
everyone. Yeah, I'll throw you a question first next time. Put you on the spot in the hot seat.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it made me think of two, and I love hearing y'all talk about, you're working with real people, and someone, I forget which of you, it might have been Harriet, talking about like, oh, if, a client might think like, oh, we had someone in a wheelchair, like check that box, right? It's like, no, that's just one small thing. And that's, especially in media, right? Like I can see that. I can see a picture of someone in a wheelchair and I'm like, oh, we're talking about this maybe, because it's visual, right? But there's a lot of invisible disabilities and neurodivergencies. And so for how do you tell those stories that maybe aren't so, like noticeable on Instagram when you're just scrolling through a picture, right? Anyone want to jump on that?
I completely understand, because as in I understand why people would look and probably utilize images of like wheelchair user and then assume that that's inclusive, like from the past, because that's something visual. However, you just really got to think about, there's so many different disabilities and impairments out there, conditions, hidden disabilities, deaf, hard of hearing, visual impairments, and you can simply incorporate everybody and represent everybody, and it doesn't have to be like obvious, like that's still being inclusive, and you shouldn't have to write underneath it what people's disability is, or only use wheelchair users for everyone to go, oh, you're talking about disability. Like it shouldn't be like that. Like there should just be like a general awareness, and you'd like to think like kind of some, not to be rude, but like an level of intelligence that like we're just being inclusive. So you don't really need to have, you shouldn't have to question every single person on an image, for example. Like, if I don't know, it's like really difficult one, because I understand why it's probably been utilized when it's on like a billboard in the past and it's like old school, but we're in 2022. Like shouldn't need to like pinpoint or write everything, man. I think it's so easy to utilize different stories, because we use influencer activations and influencers and creators, and not just because we're using a disabled influencer or creator, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily always going to want to talk around the disability. And I think that needs to be clear as well. Like, yes, people use their profiles to educate, and yes, they want to talk about their lived experience and day-to-day life, and that's great. But like sometimes they just want to talk around a product, or they just want to talk about the day-to-day life, or they're talking about fitness, beauty, whatever it may be. Like, you shouldn't always, like, a narrative shouldn't always be, oh, I want to use a disabled person as part of my campaign and they have to talk about this. I think that's very outdated as well, because that's not inclusive, because then you're trying to force someone to talk around the disability, whereas it should just be a natural narrative. Like, yes, if they want to talk about it, great, as much as they want to, as much as they want to share their experience, but sometimes people don't, and that's still okay. And it still shouldn't be like, well, I don't know. It's like, it's really difficult, because it's kind of definitely in the process, but I think there's a lot of education to go on, like what a campaign looks like that's truly representative, and how people expect it to look as well.
Just to kind of pick up on that, I think that it's exactly right that maybe brands previously engaged with disability in a really self-serving way. So like there was a purpose to why you had a disabled person in and out there, either because you're patting yourself on the back, or because you're going to engage in a narrative specifically around that disabled individual because they're disabled. Unfortunately, we are moving in a direction where people realize that that's not true, authentic inclusion and representation. We can show the diversity of everyone, irrespective of protected characteristics, by just having overarching campaign or creative or ad, and actually not dwelling on the disability side. And then that means that that's where we get the true color and beauty of everyone, is because we'll actually be able to sort of see that diversity in everyone that we're talking about. So I think that luckily we are moving in that direction, where someone isn't just pigeonholed and put into an advert just because they're in a wheelchair and that ticks the box. I think people are starting to realize that actually there's benefit to making sure that we're representing like humans as humans, because ultimately we all just human, and so the diversity of lived experience within that is what it's all about.
I love that. I love too, we're talking about, they're not always necessarily going to want to talk about just that, it's not just pigeonholing a person into one part of their lived experience. And it's incredibly valuable if they want to share that information and talk about that. And then we get to learn, about other aspects of their life too, and how that, may inform some of the things that they do. So on the flip side of things, we have an audience question. We talked about some things in the past. Maybe there's still some stuff in the present. The audience question asks, how do you think film and TV misrepresented neurodiversity or misrepresents?
I think that's a really good one, but Carmen, you can take it, but I do think it's a really good one.
Yeah, I think sometimes similar to what Dom and Harriet were talking about before, of just throwing someone with, putting someone with a wheelchair and ticking a box of, I have someone disabled here. Sometimes it's interesting to see that. I know they were talking about neurodiversity, but in terms of disability in general, sometimes you see that some people try to do that, but do not really involve the community. Like, for example, if you think about some examples, I don't know if you've seen the series Glee, or there's also another film called Me Before You. They have 2 wheelchair users, one in each of those productions. And in reality, the actors are not wheelchair users. They're not disabled. So sometimes you see that, and it's very interesting. Luckily, I think it's not happening anymore at the moment. You have, for example, sex education. You have an actor that is in a wheelchair who's playing a disabled character. But then you also have the case of, why do you have to write a disabled character instead of just having a character being played by an actor who's disabled? And I think when it comes to neurodiversity, sometimes there's the designer in our team is on the autistic spectrum, and he has talked a lot about these kinds of things. We've made videos in the past for our social media channels about this, but it's interesting to see that many times the easy way is to go towards the stereotypes. So, for example, with someone on the autistic spectrum, the easy way to represent that is someone that has maybe some difficulties socializing, that is very gifted. You can go to the other side, and maybe more so now you have maybe someone that is very wholesome and quirky, and that's how they represent someone being autistic. And it's not one way or the other. Like, there's not a specific example that you will say, oh, if someone is autistic, they look like this or they act like this. It's such a, you can find people so different, and it's about authenticity. And sometimes you will pick someone for something that they do because they see a character in a show doing that thing and they think it's funny, because sometimes it's paired with a laughing track. And then someone who, for example, in real life does that same thing, it's like they may feel that they cannot do that because people will think that it's funny, and in reality they're just being authentic.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of neurodiversity and misrepresentation in film and TV programs, I think there's just a lot of exaggeration. It's exactly what Carmen said. There's a lot of exaggeration and based on stereotypes. So the spectrum and it's so there's, everybody's just so different, right? Like in the world anyway. But yeah, I think they just really pinpoint specific things like superpower, like, and it's, I don't think they quite realize that it's offensive and it's not true. So that's, I think that you get a lot of backlash. There's some progress. I can't think of the one specifically, but we've spoke about it within the team, and it's just like Carmen said, you should just, if you're writing in someone with a neurodiversity, the easy way is get the actor to get the actor to actually match who you're playing as such. So like, you can't just force someone. I don't know. It's, I think it's not happening as much, but I do still see it happening and being exaggerated as such.
I think there's also an element of moving hopefully away from people laughing at things and then laughing with things instead. So I think typically we've found disability amusing, and we see this caricature of certain aspects of disability, and whether that's in an entertainment show or a kind of sitcom or something in between. And neurodiversity is used as an extreme to get an extreme response in some way, for entertainment. And I think again that isn't correct, because that isn't necessarily the lived experience of an individual. So you're having to kind of ham it up and exaggerate it, purely to make it more entertaining. And again, I think we can find better ways to make that entertainment through genuinely great script writing and leaning on the lived experience of an individual to help that process along.
I was just going to add as well that I think quite often in the media, especially with neurodiversity, it's very gendered. It's normally a male that's presented as someone who is on the autistic spectrum, when in reality we know that women are on the spectrum too. And I think that's played into a lot of, it's been really harmful for the community, and especially for women trying to get a diagnosis as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, I was curious about when we were talking about we have representation in the media, and we were talking about how people might laugh at it, right, for a sake of entertainment. And that's one reaction that is either playing maybe from the writer's team is playing in front of a stereotype, or like you said, the laugh track, where we're literally being told this is a funny thing. And then there's the other side of maybe for some folks, that if they're being introduced to a different disability, the general audience member might have fear around this disability. And so I'm curious, where do you think this fear comes from for folks? I think maybe the preconceptions and the misrepresentation we've had in the past that we've talked about might touch on it. And how do you think this fear could be removed? So through some of the work that y'all do, and maybe that others are doing out there.
I think that fear there's kind of probably multiple lenses of where fear comes from, but one that's very distinct is people not wanting to offend and not wanting to upset. And so the fear is of just doing the wrong thing, and not maybe necessarily like something about the individual. I think that people are pretty switched on most of the time to not be like personally fearful of someone for their difference. You'd hope that we've gone far enough to know to not be like that. So I think more often than not, the fear is around just not wanting to do the wrong thing, not want to be offensive, because we don't feel we have complete knowledge. And so we would always say, if you're not sure, ask the question, because actually, like, asking that question is something that the individual's probably been asked many, many times in their life already. It gives you the answer you need to be comfortable and confident that you're doing things how that individual would like. And similarly, you're opening up that dialogue, you're opening up that vulnerability, so that you've got this kind of open two-way dialogue with that individual now, and therefore you can kind of move forward, put in kind of best practice in right from the outset. So I think that you can always do more, of course, but you could never assume to think you've got complete knowledge. So making sure that you're doing what you can to make another individual as comfortable as possible is all you can ever do in that situation. For me, it's that kind of creating a safe space, and making sure that you're not feeling like you're someone that has all the answers, because we're not. No, as someone from the disabled community, I don't know all the answers for everyone else with other disabilities. I've got my lived experience, and that's all I truly am very knowledgeable on, and I should be open to learning, on behalf of everyone else.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think there's a lot of fear around language, and like Dom said, like there's a fear that you don't want to offend, and there is a fear around like what language to use or how to say something, for example. And I do appreciate that, because that if you've not got the lived experience yourself, you don't want to say the wrong thing. And I know that across every individual may have, and country, like country specific, and individuals may have a preference of language or how they prefer to say certain terms or words or whatever it may be. So I think again there's just a lot of learning. So as long as you're not coming across like ignorant and you're actually trying to learn, build your knowledge, I think that's the best thing. And by doing nothing, obviously you're never going to build that kind of education or awareness. So yeah, I think like a lot of people are fearful, then they don't do anything, and then it never gets done. So like you have to start somewhere, and asking the questions and having the right people to talk to and to communicate to and ask questions in a safe space is like the best start. Because like Dom said, like we do not know everything, we do not know what's right across the board, and different individuals will have certain preferences, but just like having that awareness and like don't come across ignorant, because I think you can see right through that, like if you're not trying. But there's like fear across language as well, I would say, and doing things wrong, like you said, Dom.
Thank you for that, Harriet and Dom. We have some more questions coming in from the audience, so feel free, audience, if you have questions, to drop them in the chat and we can relay those. This one's a hot question perhaps. Do you think social media popularity is leading to a glorification of neurodiversity? So this is an interesting question. And I feel like with social media, there's, we hear the word trending. Is things trending a lot, right? So as a team that is in this dialogue on a regular basis, do you have maybe experience with a client that wants to come in for those reasons that are maybe a little sticky, and you want to help clarify a path for them? And then on the other side of it, with this question directly, is there maybe like, when we were talking about like, oh, we see this person representation and now they're represented, and now they're suddenly like the spokesperson for a type of community, but we can only speak to our own experience. So you can talk about that balance perhaps for how to tell a story and help, but also stay within the realm of I don't know. Now I'm just trailing on with a long question. I think we got enough to work with.
Ali or Carmen, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I can. I think social media in general has an immense power, and I think nowadays, especially young people, I think are more educated when it comes to certain topics, and maybe it's easier to learn about things like neurodiversity nowadays because you can find creators online that talk about their own experiences. It's a hard one. I think if someone wants to say something about it while I keep thinking about it, go on.
I'll happily say a little bit. I think for me, because we work with creators and they almost always are only referencing their own lived experience, we don't see that that individual becomes the gospel for the community necessarily. I think for us, it's so important that when we work with creators, our job is to pair authentically an individual with any given campaign or any of the given brand or piece of communications. And that connection is almost our currency, that authenticity. So if we tried to have one individual then speak for everyone or speak for every product or speak for every campaign, that wouldn't make sense. And similarly, if that narrative of neurodiversity tried to represent all of neurodiversity, again, it wouldn't come across as authentic. So I would say no. I think if you do things well, there isn't this kind of, you know, glorification as it was. I don't think that should be the way it is, and I don't think it is in what we do. And if it is happening, then I think that they're probably doing something wrong.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dom. You know, we're getting a lot of questions coming in too about this on this topic, you know, of relatability and storytelling, and also we want to stay within the realm of, you know, lived experiences for these people. And so have you ever come up across like sacrifices when you're working with a client or with someone where it's like, well, we want to help you talk about this, but maybe we can redirect? And is that a sacrifice for you or for them? I guess the question also would be.
I wouldn't say there's necessarily like sacrifices. I think as part of what we do is like, we're not only, you know, just setting up a campaign and like going live and doing whatever. We also want to add that element of consultation and, you know, expertise from the beginning. So there's probably like elements sometimes of a brief that we look at, and in an ideal world, a client will want everybody to talk about this and they want it to be like this, and this is the points that they want them to cover. But sometimes there's an element of us, you know, not pushing back, but like just kind of educating around, like, that's not how we quite see it. And that's obviously like Dom's job from the briefing point to our job as delivering it. That like, yeah, you just have to have that back and forth conversation. Like, we know what the creator and influencer authentically and naturally talks about. So by putting something false or forced into their kind of onto their platform, it's not going to deliver and it's not going to perform well. So there's never like sacrifices. There's more like advising. Like, if we see something like a brief or a specific point that a client wants to mention or in a certain way, we would always try and match it to that person's profile to make sure they're getting the most, for their budget, obviously, because they want to have the delivery, they want to have the reach, they want to have the messaging correct, and, you know, everything that a good campaign kind of entails. So sometimes you just have to like advise, like, this is what we see the concept being working better. So and more often than not, the relationships that we have with our clients are really strong, and they do trust us as the experts to go with that, because at the end of the day, you want it to deliver and you want it to perform well. So a slight tweak here and there in order for it to fit on someone's profile correctly isn't a sacrifice. It ends up the message going further and working better, to be honest. So but I would say that that's a massive part of our, like, you can't just, we have to always have that element of consultancy, because otherwise, why are we like that? That's why we're there. Like, why are we there otherwise? Because they obviously don't always, because some companies do, but they might not have the kind of disability led experience on their team. So we're there to kind of remove that fear and just kind of advise on what's best and what will perform well. But yeah.
I was just going to add very briefly that I suppose you know, when you say like, what's the sacrifice around that? Like, sometimes the client has this vision of their creative, and then we know that leaning on the creator to help shape something, you know, as to be as good as it can be, is the way to go. So sometimes they might want to talk about disability explicitly, but actually talking about disability explicitly isn't relevant for a particular campaign. And that, you know, it will come out if it's relevant, if it's natural to that individual, it will come out in a really authentic way. But sometimes it just won't, and it's a great ad, it's representative because it is, but it's not going, this relates to my disability because X, because that's just not necessary. Because what, you know, you don't have someone non-disabled talking about why it links to their ability, for example. Yeah, I think that trusting the creator as well, putting that creative freedom in the hands of the creator is something that not all brands want to do, but quite often you'll get very good results from allowing that to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I'm curious, Harriet and Dom, you both, I feel like in what we were just talking about, I got to see a little glimpse behind the curtain of what it is you do. So I'd love to hear, like the actual logistics, like, hey, I'm a client. This is what I want to do. Can you talk, popcorn style, if you want to, like, through the team, like you get a new client or a new approach, what is the process? And I'm sure this varies depending on the budget a bit and what they want to talk and all of that. But I'm curious, like, what's the protocol for maybe people listening? Like, what can they expect if they were to come to you and ask you for some guidance and to work with you?
Should we do the first half and the second half and tag team like a relay? So typically someone will come to us, or sometimes we will come to them if we see an amazing opportunity as well. If we think that there's something happening where we can actually create something really special, we might approach an individual client as well. But more often than not, someone comes to us and they'll say, hey, we'd love to make an inclusive campaign with you. They might want it to be representative. They might want it to be a mixture of disabled and non-disabled individuals. They might want to lean on some disability related narrative, or a narrative that's not disability related at all. So it can be real diversity right there and then, and that's often where things might split in a different direction almost straight away in terms of the creative. But then from that point, we will then go away and kind of work up the creative execution based on, what platform they might want, budget, of course, as you say, and then, budget dictates also how we work, what creators we'll work with, because whether you're a nano influencer or a hero influencer, we might be able to afford to put them in the campaign or not. Similarly, numbers of influencers and what content the client wants. Do they want YouTube, or do they want TikTok, or do they want 10 creators or 50 creators, and do they want them in the US, or do they want them in Eastern Europe? And again, all of those things have a massive factor on what we'd actually sort of propose. Then we obviously create the creative, as it were, and then we pitch that back to them, and that's got, amongst other things, a set of deliverables that we all always try and guarantee. So we know that for a lot of people, the world of influencer creator marketing is kind of new, and so for a particular budget, we want them to know that they're getting genuine value for money. So we give very kind of distinct KPIs and very distinct deliverables, so they know exactly what they will get for any given budget of the campaign. And then hopefully we're at the point of signing off, and we're celebrating because we're all really excited about this awesome campaign that we're about to do collaboratively and like break new ground with this given client to do an awesome job. And I'll kind of do a kickoff meeting to introduce the client to the campaigns team, and then I'll pass over.
Yeah, Dani, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so after that, what we normally do is, based on the brief and feedback from the client, we'll draw up a list of like diverse influencers and creators that we think would be like a great fit for the campaign. We like send all those over to the client to get their thoughts and feedback. Based on that, we'll then go ahead and contract influencers in. And we obviously write up a brief for the influencer with specifics around content and what we're looking for. But again, we do very much rely on the influencer to kind of let them lead on the creative and come up with something that would fit perfectly for their kind of brand and their online profiles. And then pretty much after that, we pretty much go into creating the content with the influencer, and we always make sure that our clients have final sign off and approval on all content before it goes live. So there's normally a little bit of back and forth, getting amendments or doing slight tweaks here and there, but normally nothing too major, I'd say, for majority of our campaigns. And yeah, then it's getting the campaign live, and then after that we get all the insights and data in and we analyze it all, and then we do what we call a post-campaign analysis, where we do a big hour-long report that we present to the client, where we analyse the whole campaign, how it performed, and yeah, any future recommendations.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So we have just a couple minutes left. We're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. So I'm going to try to squeeze in a few more questions. We got one from the audience that I think is really interesting. What are some things film writers could do to improve the representation of autistic / neurodivergent characters in their films?
I think that's pretty simple from my point of view, as in just get them on the board, get the people, whoever you're talking about or talking on behalf of, basically they should be part of the conversation from the start to the finish. You can't write a story on someone else's behalf. You wouldn't do that with anybody else. So to get the authentic real life story, you just have to have the representation from the beginning. So they should be on the board, or they should be part of the team, or whatever it may be. I think it's just start to finish. That's a simple fix, because then if you get any backlash or any negative feedback, you know that you've had someone from the community or with that lived experience that's helped you on that. So like you've got that validation to a degree. Obviously, you're not going to always please everyone because there's just so many nuances within it, but that is a very quick, simple fix, I would like to say.
Absolutely. That's, I think, absolutely right. And, having the people in the room and part of the dialogue. And so to close, on that note, what shifts do y'all envision in the realm of representation in the next few years? If more people are in the room, being part of the writer's room, being part of the creative teams, being part of the developers, if we get that piece, right, what shifts do you think we could see?
I think personally massive shifts, because I think it'll just become kind of like the norm, and it won't be as like something that's as fade or as niche, because it's just going to be more common across, like when people have asked like how come people have been misrepresented in films or whatever it may have been, like that won't be the case. So like the negativity and the old type stereotypes will be removed, because the right people are on the board and the right people are on different teams, whatever it may be. And I think it'll be more consistent. Like, I don't think it needs to be disabled influencers or creators and non-disabled influencers and creators. It's just going to be inclusive and diverse across the board, race, gender, sexuality, whatever it may be. It's just going to be diverse across the board. And I think people will be a lot more comfortable with that and consistently do it, rather than like, oh, I'm going to do a one-off activation over here and then in a few years I'll do another one, because it's just not true to the world really, and to the communities, every community as a whole. So I'd like to say that it would get more consistent and everyone will be a bit more confident around it, so everyone will be a bit more educated, so the fear would hopefully be reduced and removed a little bit, and like the barriers and the questions, like I'd like it to just become the norm personally.
Yeah, and I think it's also the media to understand the power that they have to create people's perceptions of others in society, and realizing that, if we are inclusive, not only in films and shows, but also in marketing campaigns, in advertisements, people will start to realize that, disabled people are not charity cases, or they're not Paralympians only, but also I think there's a part of non-disabled people to realize that the same with other minorities, they can be allies to the disabled community, and they can learn from them and realize that we don't know everything, and we sometimes have to take a step back and listen to the people that actually know. And that can be not only, it can be people from Asian people, Black people, transgender people, disabled people. It's just that we can be allies, and I think, yeah, that's what I would like to see more of.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thank you to this entire panel for making the time today. Dom, what's the best way for folks to connect with the Purple Goat team, greatest of all time, and all of y'all, LinkedIn and socials. Obviously, you must be on all of them as this is your forte.
Yeah, if you search Purple Goat Agency on Google, we'll come up and you can find us. Purplegoatagency.com, Purple Goat Agency on basically all the socials, so you can find us and follow us there. On our website, we've got an inquiry form for people to get in touch. They want to ask another question. Similarly, you can contact info@purplegoatagency.com to ask any questions just via email as well. And you'll find all of us in and around that as well, because we're all on our socials quite a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for making the time today and for this conversation. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.